Okay, we continue our discussion of the transmission of the oral law. Last session, we looked at the way Rambam describes the literature up to his day, including the literature of the Geonim, and he says that because of the extreme problems of the time, the wisdom of the wise has been lost, and even the writings of the Geonim cannot be understood to people at the time. And needless to say, you cannot understand the Bavli, the Yerushalmi, and all the other books. And as I mentioned last time, have in mind that even from Rambam's own introduction, it is obvious that you don't need to know all of the Bavli, Yerushalmi, Sifra, Sifrei Toseftot in order to determine the halacha, but it is part of the plan to convince the reader that you must use my book, because otherwise you're going to be clueless. And here, following this introduction, it comes to the conclusion: Maimonides ספרדי ונשענתי על הצור ברוך הוא ובינותי בכל אלו הספרים. I, Moshe, the son of Maimon, bestirred myself. נערתי חוצני, like I got up and I decided to take action. Taking action in the sense of binoti b'chol elo asfarim. I have intently studied all these works. The word lehavin is a key word for Rambam. Before that, he wrote that binat nevonenu nistatrat, the wisdom has been lost. And also when he spoke about the scholars who came after the Talmud, he says amdu achar chibur Talmud uvanu bo. So for him, this bina is to thoroughly understand what is written in the text in front of you. So he says here that all the books, all the works that are necessary for one to understand the halacha, that people cannot have a command of in his days, he did study, and that includes the Bavli, the Yerushalmi Talmud, the Midrashei Halacha, the Toseftot, etc. וראיתי לחבר דברים המתבררים מכל אלו החיבורים. וראיתי means I have decided. I've come to the conclusion that it's necessary to put together a work that will have the conclusions of all these commentaries. Like he wants to serve you the final product. בעניין האסור והמותר והטמא והטהור עם שאר דיני תורה. He uses the phrase asur, mutar, tameh, tahor because this is a common phrase in rabbinic literature. They always say asur and mutar, tameh, tahor, but he says sha'ar dinei Torah. There are other halachot in the Torah, so he's going to include all the laws. Kulan belashon brura v'derech ktsara, and all of these laws will be presented with a clear language, and not only clear, also succinct. To be very, and we know that people speak about leshono hazahav, the golden language of Rambam. He has really very clear way to transmit his message in Hebrew. עד שתהא תורה שבעל פה כולה סדורה בפי הכל, בלא קושיה ולא פירוק. I will present to you, he says, the totality of oral law in a way that you could easily review and remember, without a question, without a need for an answer, ולא זה אומר בכו וזה אומר בכו, without different opinions, this one says A and this one says B, אלא דברים ברורים, קרובים, נכונים. Clear, karov is convincing, one that is acceptable, נכונים, true, על פי המשפט אשר יתבאר מכל אלו החיבורים והפירושים הנמצאים מימות רבנו הקדוש ועד עכשיו. Following the mishpat, the verdict or the judgment, which will be distilled from all these works that exist from the time of Rabbeinu HaKadosh, from Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi till today. This is definitely a tremendous task for even a team of scholars, and even more so for one person only. And as I mentioned before, the fact that Maimonides did not quote his sources and did not present the argumentation and the process of how we came to the decision, created a lot of opposition, to the extent that at a certain point the books of Maimonides was burned when over Serfat Sifrei Rambam. Was not only because of philosophy, it was also his halachic approach that upset many people, who said, how did you arrive at your conclusion, and why am I bound by your conclusion? So by the same measure that his work spread very fast in the whole world, and it was copied over and over again. I mentioned this is the greatest number of manuscript of any work is that of Maimonides. By the same measure, it stirred opposition, mainly by the Ravad, Rabbeinu Avraham ben David Poskia, who wrote the Hasagot, who wrote the arguments against Rambam, and sometimes he just wrote the argument for the sake of the argument, to show that you don't have to accept Maimonides without doubt. That he wanted to show that there are questions that must be asked. But also have in mind, and I think that this is the reason that that's in my opinion, my interpretation, the reason that Maimonides did not survive as a book of halakha that everybody refers to is maybe that sentence, Lo ze omer becho ve ze omer becho. This one says A and this one says B. This is the core of Rambam's ideology. I will give you one option and one option only. There's no flexibility. There's no need. Everybody could do the same thing. And even though one could claim the Torah also does that, right? The Torah doesn't say. There are very few cases where Torah gives you an option, such as Pesach Sheni for those, but only in cases of emergency. But the Torah wouldn't say you could celebrate Pesach with matzot or without matzot. So one would have argued that Torah is also a sort of monolithic and only provides one view. But if you look carefully, you realize that the Torah gives us, in many cases, parameters which are very broad and undefined. The Torah says, "V'zavachta et haPesach ba'erev kibo hashemesh mo'atzet techa miMitzrayim." You shall slaughter the Pesach in the evening, as the sun sets. At the time when you left Egypt, what is evening? What is sunset? When did you leave Egypt? The Torah says, "Ve'achalta v'savarta berachta." Eat, you will be satisfied, and you'll say a blessing. The Torah does leave wiggle room. Where the Torah does not leave room for flexibility is in the rituals of the temple. The Mishkan, usually everything that has to do with the Mishkan, with the Korbanot, is very accurate, quantified, and measured. But the service of the temple was not meant for the multitudes. It was only for a small sect of Kohanim who were there. So the Torah does allow for flexibility. Even when the Torah describes, and we spoke about when we did the parasha, the text from Shoftim, even when the Torah says, "Ve'kamta ve'alita lamakom asher yivhar Hashem uvata el hashofet asher yeh b'imhem," you go up to the central court and you ask the judge, the contemporary judge, meaning that it is the contemporary judge who could give you the right verdict, and it could change from generation to generation. So, for that reason, even though Rambam has this clarity of language and beautiful organization in the way that he presents the matter and the text, it was not followed as a book of halakha by all, because people needed that wiggle room. There were always, this years later, Rabbeinu Shlomo ben Adret Rashba will say that it is impossible to write a legal work that will address all situations, because in every case, and he was talking about financial disputes, but it's true also in the world of ritual, in the world of halakha, there will always be new elements that one did not consider. And he says there's no way that you could write a book that will cover all the elements of the halakha. There will always be the need to address new elements and new situations. So this is how Rambam presents his work, and he says not only I'm going to write this book in a clear way, but it will enable עד שיהיו כל הדינים גלויים לקטן ולגדול בדין כל מצווה ומצווה. All the laws will be revealed, will be open to here the translate young and old, but I think katan vegadol, he means one who is great in wisdom and one is just a beginner. Bedin kol mitzvah u'mitzvah uvedin kol advarim shtiknu hachamim unviim. So it will include the laws of the Torah, the laws that were made by the rabbis and presented by the prophets. כללו של הדבר, כדי שלא יהיה אדם צריך לחיבור אחר בעולם בדין מדיני ישראל. It says, as in what concerns the halacha, the law, you do not need any other book in the world, but rather חיבור זה יהיה מקבץ לתורה שבעל פה כולה. That will include all of oral law, עם התקנות והמנהגות והגזרות, with the famous three that he always refers to: the takanot, the decrees, minagot, practices, gzerot, prohibitions or that are meant to prevent a certain situation. שנעשו מימות משה רבנו ועד חיבור התלמוד. So he divides it into two sections, from Moshe till the Talmud, and the works of the Geonim, bechol חיבוריהן. And remember that for him, the Geonim includes all the rabbis of Spain and Germany and France that lived up to his time. All of that will be included in his book with a final conclusion. לפיכך קראתי שם חיבור זה משנה תורה. That's why I call it משנה תורה. Mishneh is the second in command. The viceroy is Mishneh Torah. We call in the Humashim, Devarim is called Mishneh Torah, and that is the source of its Greek name Deuteronomy. Right? The Deutero is second. Nomi is means laws in Greek. But what Rambam says is not only the Mishneh Torah, the repetition of the Torah as is Sefer Devarim, but rather the second in command to the Torah. He explains it, לפי שאדם קורא תורה שבכתב תחילה, ואחר כך קורא בזה, ויודע ממנו תורה שבעל פה כולה, ואינו צריך לקרוא ספר אחר ביניהם. All you need is the Torah and the Mishneh Torah. So Rambam basically wants to marginalize or erase even all the literature that was created for about, by cautious estimates, 1400 years. One book that will sum up the work of 1400 years of halachic discussion. This is pretty ambitious, and of course contentious, and of course there were many arguments against Maimonides because of that, as I mentioned before. And soon we'll speak about how it was accepted and some problems with the text. But we're about to conclude the introduction. It says, וראיתי לחלק חיבור זה הלכות בכל עניין ועניין, ואחלק ההלכות לפרקים שבאותו עניין. וכל פרק ופרק אחלק אותו להלכות קטנות, כדי שיהיו סדורים על פה. So he said, I decided to organize this work, this composition, by halachot, the laws of Shabbat, the laws of judges, the laws of a thief and a robber, etc. And they will be broken down to chapters, and the chapters to smaller halachot, to units very similar to the Mishnah. Some of them, יש מהם הלכות שהן משפטי מצווה אחת בלבד, והיא המצווה שיש בה דברי קבלה הרבה, והיא עניין בפני עצמו. So here, faithful to his way of having the historical review, and this is something I think that is missing today, he says you have to associate the mitzvah, the halachot, with the source in the Torah. And he says sometimes you will find many halachot written about one mitzvah only that is mentioned in the Torah. And that is a mitzvah where there is a lot of oral tradition, Kabbalah, v'inyan bifnei atzmo, v'yesh men halachot שהן כוללים משפטי מצוות הרבה. אם יהיו אותן המצוות כולן בעניין אחד. And some of the halachot, some of the titles that he gives will include many mitzvot. So, for example, Hilchot Ma'aseh HaKorbanot. There's one of the sections of the 14 sections of Maimonides is called Hilchot Ma'aseh HaKorbanot. And in Hilchot Ma'aseh HaKorbanot, he will include references to hundreds of mitzvot because there are so many mitzvot that deal with the korbanot, each mitzvah with one particular part of the sacrifice. Whereas in the Chot Shabbat, he counts there are only 5 mitzvot in the Torah, but those 5 mitzvot cover many chapters in the halachot of Maimonides. And why is that? מפני שחילוק חיבור זה הוא לפי העניינים, לא לפי מניין המצוות, כמו שהדבר על הקורא בו. Unlike some authors before him who organized their halachic writings following the order of the mitzvot, he organized it thematically, and in a way he's just really emulating Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, because what Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi did, he took all the material that existed up to his time that was associated with the psukim of the Torah, because people studied in the form of Midrash Halacha, and applied it to the and reorganized the material thematically. ומניין מצוות של התורה הנוהגות לדורות 613 מהן מצוות תעשה מצוות לא תעשה. So he says there are 613 mitzvot, 248 are siman, so it's a mnemonic device, the number of the members or the bones in the human body, and 365 negative mitzvot corresponding to the number of days in the solar year. So that in itself is, by the way, disputed. Maimonides asked the question of the source of the 613 mitzvot, and he arrives at the conclusion that Israeli we have no source to determine that we have 613 mitzvot. I'm not going to get into this now, but I just think it's interesting that people became obsessed with the number 613, and whenever you have a discussion on what the value of the Torah, or how what we get from it, or what are we obligated to do, we always say we have to have 613 mitzvot. When, as a matter of fact, it doesn't matter if you count them as 613 or 700 or 500. You follow and you fulfill what you can and what is possible. Meaning that I'm saying that because up until Rambam and even after him, there were different ways to count the mitzvot. That's why Maimonides created the rules, 14 rules, to decide how to include or not include a mitzvah. Now, but if you would take all the lists of all the counters of the mitzvot before Rambam, and you combine them, you will get to about 700 mitzvot. So it doesn't mean that we miss some of them. It's just that some of them are irrelevant, or some of them one person counted as one mitzvah and another one counted as 2. So this is should not really be our main concern. But anyway, that concludes the introduction of Maimonides, and I want to, before we move on to the next important book in the halachic development, there were of course many other works between the Mishneh Torah and the next important book, which is the Tur of Rabbeinu Yaakov ben Rabbeinu Asher, but those are the ones that stand out. So a couple of words about what happens with the Mishneh Torah, and as we finish the introduction, we'll go back and look at the text. One of the problems that still perplexes people in the yeshivot trying to figure out Maimonides is that as much as he tried to convey this clear language, clear message, first he doesn't mention his sources, doesn't mention his halachic process. Sometimes he ignores certain segments of the Talmud, usually what we call the ukimta. The ukimta is when you narrow down the setting of the Mishnah to a very particular case. This is what some people call the dialectics of the Mishnah, and then the dialectics of the Tosafot. In dialectics, meaning like the double reading of saying, dividing one case into two, and then sometimes by that avoiding the mahloket. Instead of saying that the two sages or two scholars or two opinions of the Mishnah argue about a certain thing, they will say they are talking about two different things. They are not talking about the same case. They talk about the classic formula would be that if it's this case, they all agree that it's forbidden. If it's that case, they all agree that it's permitted. What they argue is about the case in the middle, so they narrow the area of the mahloket. This is part of the agenda of the Talmud, to narrow mahloket as much as possible, to narrow the scope of the dispute. Probably because they felt that if the dispute spreads over broad areas and fundamental issues, then it puts in question, it puts in doubt the whole validity of the oral law and of their halakha. But I think I mentioned this example before of a ukimta that really narrows the Mishnah. That's a classic example. That is the first Mishnah in the second chapter of Elu Metziot, of Ava Metziah. Elu Metziot Shelo ve'elu Chayav. The first chapter. Shnei Muhazim betalit. The first chapter of the Gemara. It speaks about two people who come to Bedin holding a talit, and it says Ze omer kula sheli veZe omer kula sheli. He says it's all mine. He says it's all mine. Ze omer ani metzatia veZe omer ani metzatia. He says I found it. He says I found it. The different order. First they say I found it, then he says kula sheli. And the Gemara says, why do you have to say twice Ze omer veZe omer, Ze omer veZe omer? Right? Just say this one says I found it and it's all mine, and this one says I found it and it's all mine. Why do you have to say, he says I found it, he says I found it, he says it's all mine, he says it's all mine? So the Gemara comes to the conclusion that you talk about two separate cases. One of them is the case of Metziah, when you found an object and two people fight over who found it first. And the second one is about Mekah or Memkar. It's about a purchase. But why would two people argue about an item that they purchased? If they the Gemara says, let's go to the seller and see who did he sell it to, and they say no, we went to the seller. We speak about a case where you went to the seller and you asked him, and it turns out that they both paid him. So they both left money on the counter and they took the object, and now they fight who owns the object. So now the Gemara says, okay, so if this is the case, let the seller give an object, the same talit, to the other person, because both paid. So both now the fault is not with the people who come to Bedin, but with the seller who didn't provide the merchandise. Did you realize that as we go through this Okimta, it's a famous sugya, we all studied it, I think, but you realize that it makes no sense, because as we go through it progressively through the sugya, the Mishnah makes it more and more unreasonable and illogical to fit that situation into the Talmud, into the words of the Mishnah. A person comes to Bedin and says, it's all mine, and you tell me that we're talking about a case where he bought it and with another guy, and they both paid money, and now the problem really is with the seller who didn't provide the merchandise. So the Gemara says, okay, let's go to the merchant and ask him to provide another item. The Gemara says, no tzricha, no, we're talking about a case where this item was the last item in the store, and it won't be available for a while. That was before the days of Amazon and drones and 1 hour shipping, right? So now they really are fighting about the object, not about the money. So how do you squeeze such a complex case into the Mishnah, into the 4 words, Ze omer kula sheli? How does it even fit there? And not only that, there's no balance between the description of the first case, Ze omer metzatia, that one says, I found it, where it's clear from his words what was the case. And the second case, Omer Kula Sheli, where you cannot figure out from the words what really happened. So obviously this is a classic example of an ukimta, of pushing the words of the Mishnah into a corner that does not really convey the true meaning of the Mishnah. And in many cases, Rambam ignored such ukimtot. He ignored the whole process of the Talmud of narrowing down the words of the Mishnah to such limited cases. Partially because he, as I said, he studied the Yerushalmi, which had a different understanding of the Mishnah. Partially because as an author who was very well aware of the difficulty of phrasing things economically, that with as few words as possible, he realized that the assumption of the Talmud that every word in the Mishnah is accounted for is an impossible assumption. Meaning to assume that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi did not include any redundancy or any superfluous word in the Mishnah is impossible in Rambam's mind. So therefore, the question about that case, this one said it's all I found it, and this one says I found it. This one says it's mine. This one says it's mine. You can't ask, why don't you economize the text and make it shorter? Because there's no interest to do it. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi is not looking to make it as economic as possible, but rather to convey the problem of Bedin. People are fighting in Bedin, and there's an ongoing, actually conveys the dynamic of the case in Bedin. So that's one thing that you have to have in mind. When you look at Rambam, it's always important to compare it's important to compare the halakha of Rambam to look up not only the Babylonian Talmud, but also the Yerushalmi Talmud. Now there's another element that one of my professors in Bar Ilan has discovered and analyzed. That's Professor Rivlin, and what he found out is that, remember that we spoke about the promulgation of Rambam's work through manuscripts. So immediately following the publication of the Mishneh Torah, everybody copied it. It spread all over. But now Maimonides had time to review the work, and as he reviewed the work, he changed his mind regarding certain things. Remember that he took him about 10 years to do it, so which is relatively a very short time to accomplish such a major work. So he looks at the text and he decides that at certain points, he has to change the text. But being a perfectionist, he would not like people to have, and Nadav, you appreciate it because you do calligraphy, amazing calligraphy. He did not want people to smear their parchment. He appreciated the written word. And if you had now in your house a copy of Mishneh Torah, and Rambam sends you a notice, hey, there's a mistake, in page in Ilchot, actually there is something like that really caused a lot of trouble to the commentators, and that is in Ilchot Basar v'Halav, where he discusses the prohibition of whether there is a prohibition of eating Besar Haya with milk. So everybody agrees that eating beef and mutton, meaning domesticated animals, their meat with dairy is biblical, and that poultry with dairy is rabbinical. The question is, what is the status of haya, of wild animals? And in the language of Maimonides is a little bit convoluted, and it's hard to determine what is exactly his opinion. And Professor Rivlin showed that what happened is this: he ruled in one way in his first edition, and then changed his mind. But when he changed his mind, he did not want the corrected text to be longer than the original text. So we had to write it in a way that it would fit perfectly into the space created by erasing the original text. And that is true regarding all of his corrections. So that's why, even though his language is very clear and very self-explanatory in all of his work, when he needed to make these corrections, there is a problem. And Maimonides also was able to prepare a third edition. But the third edition, the second edition, he was able to prepare and to distribute. Some people got the new edition, some people just copied and corrected the edition that they had at home. The third edition, he did not have time to distribute, and it remained in the possession of the family through his sons, the Negidim in Egypt. Addressing now Joseph's question, it might be an example of Sugya le Rav Ha'atya. Yes, it could be that the discussion was academic, theoretical, and not necessarily applicable to the halacha, but that's not how everybody saw it. So Rambam was willing to look at it as just an academic, theoretical discussion, this mental gym that the Gemara performs, and not to include it in the in the halacha. And by the way, if we speak about mental gym, or the academic, theoretical discussion, I was once asked this question regarding the Mishnah. Do we find in the Mishnah examples of academic, theoretical discussions? And the answer is yes, and abundantly. Not in all tractates, but almost. Different in different measure, different volume, but the rabbis of the Mishnah definitely developed discussions that were following certain mathematical or logical formulas, and they used all combinations. So, for example, in Masechet Yevamot, in the Mishnah Yevamot, they speak about what happens if a deaf person marries is married, and then he dies, and the other brother has to do yibum, which could be a common thing, right? A deaf person with a hearing person. But then they go into situations such as 4 brothers, all deaf mute, who married 4 sisters. And now what happens if this one dies and that one dies, and one of them did gave a divorce instead of doing chalitza, and they give you it becomes so complicated that you cannot study today. I study Masechet Yevamot without a chart that gives you all the possibilities that the rabbis suggest. The same with Mishnah Masechet Kinim, which speaks about the 2 doves, or the turtle doves that one has to bring as a korban, and he speaks about what happens if you designated 2 birds for the korban, and they're both white, and then you came in the morning and they're black, and what happens if you put 1 white bird and black bird, and then you found 2, all the different combinations. And obviously all these discussions were not practical. Even the famous Mishnah that opens Masechet Shabbat, that it's sort of part and parcel of people learning Mishnayot and Gemara. Yetziot HaShabbat 2 shel 4 bifnim, 2 shel 4 b'chutz. The ways to pass an object from one property to another on Shabbat are 4, and there are 2 inside, 2 outside. The poor man stands outside, and the giver stands inside, and he puts something in his hand and he takes it out, or he puts. All these combinations are all theoretical, and probably were not very common, and and you could find it in each and every masechet. So we have this mental gym, this like Sugya le Rav Ha'atya. So just a theoretical discussion, not only in the Gemara, but in the Mishnah as well. So all these problems plagued the works of Rambam after it was published, but most significantly, really, it is the fact that he did not allow for flexibility and for wiggle room, and did not include practices that were not that he was not fond of, or that were. It's a question of whether he was even familiar with the rich diversity of minhagim that has already evolved in Ashkenaz. We don't know that he was aware of all of them. So for people to come and look at the book and say, okay, where is my tradition? Where is my practice? That became a problem. So following Maimonides, maybe we'll, before I continue into the discussion of the tool, because that's the next one that I wanted to discuss in the sense of the development of halakha. Maybe we'll have a discussion. We'll take some questions and then we'll continue. Anyone has specific questions on that or comment? So if not, yes.
Well, you said that there's you follow as many of the halachot as you can. And
yeah.
Is that just coming from Rabbi Haim Ovadia, or?
No. What do you mean when I spoke about the mitzvot?
Yeah.
No, when I spoke about the mitzvot, what I meant is that you follow you fulfill the mitzvot that are relevant. That's what I meant. So, for example, first of all, there's I don't know if it's a joke or a true story, but I've heard of a man who decided he wants to fulfill all the mitzvot of the Torah. So when he got to the laws of divorce and he found out that if one gets divorced, he has to write the get in a certain way, that's a mitzvah to do it in a certain way. So he got divorced and remarried just to fulfill this mitzvah. So that is of course exaggerated take on the mitzvot. But the other thing is, when I say that we do what we can, each one of us tries to follow as much as possible. But the question is, for example, when you say Birkat HaMazon, is it 3 mitzvot, one for each mitzvah bracha, or 1 mitzvah only? Or when there is a dispute between the rabbis whether a certain thing is an obligation or an option. So if you follow one and you did this thing anyway, does it count as a mitzvah or not? It doesn't really matter. To whomever it should matter. If God is the chief accountant, right? He would not count it as, okay, Mr. Cohen, I can check out for him 613 out of 613, but rather Mr. Cohen did whatever was within his power and did not transgress anything deliberately and did not miss anything, any parts of the mitzvah. That's what I meant, that in the count of the mitzvot, that it is a concept that appears in the Talmud only in the 4th or 5th century, or maybe even later, because Rabbi Simlai, who says it, could even be one of the Savoraim. So up until the time, no one really cared how many mitzvot are there. And there's a beautiful statement in the Talmud that does talk about the 613 mitzvot, but says Ba Micha ve'amidan al shalosh. Micha narrow them down to 3 mitzvot. Asod mishpat ve'avat chesed ve'atznei alechet im Elohecha. So I'm answering now Joseph's comment. It sounds like Rambam was an originalist, 100%. Rambam was an original thinker. Rambam presents his system, his method. It is obvious that when you read the introduction, that with all the respect that he has to the sages of the Talmud, he almost dismisses everything that happened after the Talmud. He calls them the Geonim, Banu B'Talmud, he says, but he doesn't like the maybe the disarray in their writing. He wanted order and organization, and maybe even in the Talmud it bothered him a little bit. So yes, it was his original take, very scientific, very academic, very I would say in some cases devoid of emotion. Rambam was more analytical and logical than emotional. and that could, I think, that could also be seen, demonstrated by the fact that he is the exception among all the sages of the golden age of Spain who did not write poetry. All the great sages wrote poetry. Rambam did not write poetry. He wrote one poem, I think, as an introduction to Moreh Nevuchim, but he's not a poet like the other great sages of Sepharad, and that maybe shows a tendency to be more rigid, analytical, and maybe a personality like that could feel comfortable with slicing or chopping off all unnecessary segments until you get to the core of what the halacha that is needed, and one halacha for all. And now to answer Yosef's question, what is the point of such mental gymnastics? The point was to really, that as this gymnastics, just to sharpen your brain, but also when the rabbis of the Mishnah did that, you have to remember there was not that much material to deal with. They created everything. So when you create the material, you have the time, you have the room to get into such speculations. I think that I'm sure that some of the rabbis of the Mishnah, if they would come back to life today, and they would see the amount of material that has been written on these Mishnayot that they put together as more of a we said, abstract or academic discussion, they would have been horrified. They said, go back and start maybe paying more attention to practical Judaism. This is really the role, and that's why we're doing the Semikha. This is the message I'm trying to convey. The role of the rabbi at the end of the day is not to be bound by thousands of volumes of text, but rather go out to the street and talk to the people and see what the problems are and find solutions. Yes. So I'm answering now. Ishafel.
Rob.
Yes.
I think there's also a point of when you say like you only follow as many. One is
yeah. I got it.
When you say you should only follow as many mitzvot as possible, it's not. I don't think you're saying to disregard things that you can do, but you're saying like things like yibum, like you're not going to do yibum, like it's not like it was always an understanding that like you don't do things that it's not in your capacity to do,
right?
But it's a point of polemical.
Oh yes. No, I didn't mean it in that manner. And be careful. I didn't mean that. No.
Everything, so.
Right. I meant only to that end of counting the mitzvot, is that we do what is within our power. God counts the mitzvot. I don't think that God cares about counting the mitzvot, but the concern always of the Torah is whether you have transgressed a prohibition or did not fulfill a mitzvah, and it's not of how many mitzvot are under your belt. And I need to highlight that. I'll say that the whole idea of the 100 daily brachot that some people are obsessed with, 100 daily brachot, is a midrashic concept that is presented in Talmud. Hayav adam lomar mea brachot bechol yom. One has to say 100 brachot every day. It's beautiful. It's very nice. But then it became an obsession. It was the basis for the creation of the first Siddur, because the people of Alicina in Spain sent a letter to Rav Natronai Gaon, and they said, how do you get to 100 blessings? And he said, here you have the Amidah, you have that, and he listed sort of the skeleton of the Siddur. But later on, I mean, even today, I know that there are people who would say additional brachot on Shabbat to get to the count of Mea Brachot. And when this is done, we sort of like we lose the goal, and we lock on the ritual, and this is not healthy, because unfortunately the concept of counting in general, counting the mitzvot, counting the brachot, measuring the amount that you're going to eat and the time that passes between one eating and the other, or the beginning of the eating and the end of the eating, all these things feed directly into our need to be, this obsessive compulsive disorder that all of us have, to some extent. Most people have it, but for most of us, it's not a disorder. It's a good thing, but it could get out of hand. When it turns into a religious disorder, it's called scrupulosity. There's a book about that. Now it's recognized. I mean, years ago I referred to it in a writing, and people got upset. But now everybody recognizes it. Even Lubavitch in the website offers ways to deal with it. So when a deeply religious person is being told that there is a certain number of mitzvot, he wants to know how many mitzvot to make sure that he could check them off. When he's told that there are 100 brachot, he wants to know that he said every day 100 brachot, and we'll go and count them. When he's being told that you have to wash your hands 3 times, this is he will start saying, okay, how are the 3 times counted? Is it 3 times here, 3 times there? What if I need to do another one? So this is where we get into. That's what I meant to say, that for the Torah, the number was not critical, but the understanding what is it that has to be done. And yeah, I agree with Nadav's comment that the flexibility is needed. So I'm answering Joseph, right? That you say about the Shulchan Aruch and whether the Shulchan Aruch is flexible or not, and yes, mental gymnastics are useful for conceptualizing the text. Of course, that is helpful, but it has to remain there and not to be taken into out of context. Like the famous paradoxes that the Greeks love to engage themselves with, like the famous paradox of Zenon and the turtle, right? If Zenon goes to a race against a turtle, Zenon is a fast runner, and he runs twice as fast as the turtle. So for every inch that the turtle covers, Zenon will cover 2 inches, or like the opposite. For every 2 inches that Zenon covers, the turtle will cover 1 inch. And it turns out that they will never reach the goal, right? That was not the Greeks understood the paradox is a paradox only in the abstract realm, but not in reality. Because in reality, when you put Zenon to run against the turtle, he will win the race. But people still engage in these discussions. I would add, maybe to that as a side comment, because this really belongs to delving deeper into the text of Midrash Halacha and the Gemara. But that's an important thing that we touched only briefly upon, and that is the difference between the 2 schools of Halacha, the 2 schools of Midrash Halacha, Rabbi Ishmael and Rabbi Akiva. And we spoke about that. Between Rabbi Ishmael and Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Ishmael believed that we have this rule: Dibra Torah Kishon Bnei Adam. The Torah used the vernacular. The Torah talks in the way people understand, and not as a dry legal codex, because then it would not. We would not be able to memorize it. And it's true when you think about the beauty of the Torah, isn't it? It meshes the narrative with the halacha. We learn so many halachot just from Sefer Bereshit as it is written as a narrative, but also later on, if the Torah would be given to us as a list of rules, you're not allowed to 365 rules. We would forget that. But when it is one chapter of halachot, and then the events in the desert, and then more the stories and halachot, and halachot are written in a way that is also understood by the way humans think and speak. This is Rabbi Ishmael's approach. Rabbi Akiva says, no, every word that is written in the Torah, in the halachic part of the Torah, every word is there for a reason. So if a word is repeated, I could learn a halacha from it. Now, the Talmud never discusses the 2 methodologies. The Talmud never says, okay, so who do we follow? Do we follow the methodology of Rabbi Akiva, or do we follow the methodology of Rabbi Ishmael? Who's the one? Who's the one that we must follow? The Talmud never says that. Not only that, the names for the midot, the tools which we use to interpret the Torah, are different between the school of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Ishmael. Rabbi Ishmael calls the midot, like we say in the Siddur every morning, right? Elo midot shaTorah nidresh behem, miklal uprat uchlal, right? The generalization and details, klal uprat uchlal, etc. Rabbi Akiva defines that rule differently. He calls it ribui umi'ut veribui, inclusion and exclusion. And if you look carefully throughout the Gemara consistently uses the terms klal uprat uchlal. When it uses in the midrashei halacha that are used in the Gemara, they always use the language of Rabbi Ishmael, and only in 2 or 3 places the language of ribui umi'ut of ribui and of Rabbi Akiva. And when it does so, Rashi goes out of his way. Rashi is usually very laconic, very very short, but he writes expansively about ribui umi'ut ribui to explain what is the nature of that rule, because most readers of the Gemara are not familiar with it. However, in the long term, everybody adopted the approach of Rabbi Akiva that every letter in the Torah is there for a reason. Not only that, when we move into medieval times, and definitely today within the Orthodox world, every word of the non-halachic part of the Torah is there for a reason. Even when people speak about the narrative of Bereshit, they will say, it says, for example, she had her jar on her shoulder. Why do you need to say that it was on her shoulder, and then you have volumes written only on that word? And you cannot come and argue with them saying, listen, if you strip the story of all the unnecessary words, it will be horrible. Nobody will read it. Yeah? But, so why do people, and now I'm answering this question about the mental gymnastics, why did people throughout the ages cling more to the method of Rabbi Akiva than that of Rabbi Ishmael? Because it's more interesting, it's more intriguing, it's more challenging to the mind to find what is exactly the thing that you could learn from the extra letter. What is the difference between that chapter in the Torah where the word is included and where it's not included, and so it goes. So the same thing, by the way, happens with the way Talmud is being taught today in the Orthodox yeshivot. What we call the Litvak, the Lithuanian yeshivot. I just had a discussion with my son, who heard it from his rabbis in school, that the Ashkenazi approach is superior. And what is the proof for that the Ashkenazi way of learning is superior? Because all the yeshivot study that method. Nobody studies the other method. I said, first of all, ask him if he knows these books, Mishmerot Keuna, Lechem Abirim, the books of Rabbi Yitzhak Haitayeb and Rabbi Yitzhak Lampronti and other people who did the New Sfaradi. But I said, the fact that everybody does it doesn't prove that it's right. It only means that it has more. It's more attractive. It's shiny and brilliant and beautiful. I studied like that. I studied the Gemara for years in the Litvak mindset, and I know that only 1 or 2 of my rabbis who were honest would come to us and say, when they would see us toiling over the books of Reb Baruch Ber Leibovitz, and he said, the rabbi would say, no, forget it. This is air. It's just air. Just go back to the Gemara. But most of us wouldn't do that because you enjoy the ability to analyze and compare and discuss. But what is the tachlis? What is the halacha? There's no conclusion. So it is useful, but we have to be able to maintain the balance. So I guess we'll talk about the tour not next week, in 2 weeks. So two things. First, we'll open for some questions before we conclude. And I also want to invite, if anyone is available during the day of Eastern Standard Time to study in Havruta, I would like to find a time to start Mishnayot in depth, going through the text of Mishnah, Midrash. So send me an email and we'll know how to work it out. So before we conclude, any questions or comments on that? So, okay, I guess that will be all for today. If you want to prepare and have you have the time. Yes. Yeah. If you have time to go over, even if you did it before, but you will just refresh your memory, look at the introduction of Rabbeinu Yaakov ben Rabbeinu Asher to the Tur, and in the introduction of Rabbi Yosef Karo to the Bet Yosef and Shulchan Aruch, and those will be the texts that we'll review next time. And also, just on your spare time, whenever you have time, look at the when you do Tur Shulchan Aruch, if you have the time to compare the structure of the two books, and finally looking at the Shulchan Aruch itself. Just pick any siman at random and start reading, and see whether Shulchan Aruch allows for wiggle room. Is he flexible or not? Meaning, does he give us one halacha only, or he gives more than one option? That will be the thing that we're going to be looking at. And remember also that I did a whole series on Rabbi Yosef Karo separately. It's under Sephardic Luminaries on Spreaker that you could listen to. So that will be all for today. Thank you for joining, and we'll meet again in 2 weeks, Be'ezrat Hashem.